Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. Welcome to our little friendly weather podcast that we talk about every Wednesday night. This is the Wednesday, August 30th edition. Hard to believe we're at the end of August, moving into September. It's crazy to believe how fast this year is moving by. So welcome tonight. We have two great guests on with us. As always, our good friend Brad Panovich, Chief Meteorologist at NBC Charlotte, joining us, and as our first-time guest, Mr. Troy Kimmel. He is a University of Texas meteorologist for those guys. You teach, Troy. You do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we have a good time and known Brad for a lot of years, and if you pay me enough money tonight, we'll talk about that. No, looking forward to it, and good time, but unfortunately, there's nothing weather-wise to talk about.
I'm telling you, it's been pretty quiet down your way, huh?
It has.
We look forward to having Troy and Brad on both with us tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. This is a live broadcast. We're live streaming right now on Facebook Live, Periscope, our YouTube channel. Or if you're listening on the podcast, maybe you're traveling down the road a couple of days from now, please feel free to interact with us the best way that you want. Send those questions in via Twitter or our Facebook or Periscope or Facebook Live. We'll be able to get those answered. And we'll let our guests share any social media platforms they want to at the end of the show. So if you are listening on the podcast, you'll be able to get in touch with them as well. Like Troy said, it's been kind of quiet. No, not really. It's been pretty active here, especially here in the Carolinas. It's been fairly quiet, though. All the action has been along the Texas and Louisiana coast. So what we're going to do tonight is talk about precipitation probabilities. Once we cover that, we're going to kind of dedicate the last 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so of the show, kind of recapping Harvey. Brad has been following this as long as Troy, who's been down in Texas area. So Troy's got some firsthand experience. So we'll kind of recap Harvey as well. So before we do that, let's toss it around the table here, and I guess Harvey made landfall in Louisiana and is moving through Louisiana into Mississippi and maybe on the doorsteps of Memphis tomorrow. So I want to bring in Eric. Eric's there in Memphis. So you guys getting prepared, Eric?
Yeah, we're doing our best trying to especially get a handle on the wind and the rainfall here over the next 24 hours. It's really going to start to move in during the late overnight into tomorrow. Looks like pretty intense rainfall during the afternoon and evening tomorrow. Could get some pretty strong wind gusts. Looks like the latest track is going to take it just to the east of Memphis. And so we're looking at rainfall totals that normally with this kind of a track in the wintertime, we'd be talking the same amounts for snowfall here in Memphis, but it's rain. And it's going to be pretty heavy. So we're preparing for the distinct possibility of about 6 inches here in the Memphis metro. Portions of West Tennessee could see up to 10 inches as the thing kind of transitions to an extratropical system. It's going to add some wind to the equation as well. And so pretty strong northerly wind gusts, maybe as high as 30 to 40 miles an hour or so. So we will secure all of the trash cans outdoors and make sure that the grill covers are on secure and plan for an arc. Not anything, of course, like they had in Texas, but it's interesting to hear some of the same terminology applied to 6 to 8 inches here that they were talking about down on the coast. So we'll see how it all works out.
Yeah,
they've actually issued a flash flood watch, right? The flash flood watches are out from Mid-South.
Yep, flash flood watches are out, and actually they've proactively issued flood warnings on some of the tributaries to the river. I saw one of them in particular is at 3 feet right now, and the flash flood warning is for a crest at 22 feet tomorrow night. So they expect those to rise pretty quickly.
Wow.
Eric, are you on the marginal or slight edge of the SPC convective outlook?
Yeah, we're Memphis proper is right on the edge of the west edge of the marginal. Eastern portions of North Mississippi and southeastern West Tennessee are in the slight risk. So we're on the favorable side as far as the tornado threat. But we're going to be in a deformation zone that's going to get us some pretty strong wind gusts out of the north.
And Ricky, you guys also going to be close to the track of Harvey as he tracks through Middle Tennessee and up into Kentucky. So what's the latest there in the Tri-Cities area?
Yeah, expecting some rain late tonight into Thursday, kind of periods of rain, and then watching late Thursday night for some gusty winds, probably in our highest elevations, maybe some gust 40, 45. And then Friday, as a kind of sector of some clearing moves in and also a little bit of instability, I wouldn't be shocked to see a spin-up tornado or two in that northeast quadrant. the dynamics look like they're there. It's just going to be if we have any instability or not. The question really when it comes to Friday. I think tomorrow, though, I was reading the SPC, though, talking about perhaps a decent little tornado threat across North Alabama and Central Tennessee. So we'll watch that for our friends to the west tomorrow.
All right. And then I know earlier I said it's kind of been quiet here in the Carolinas, but I was telling you wrong. It's actually been a little active on the coastline. I'm going to bring in Jared Smith there in the Charleston area. Jared, you and Shay both have had to deal with potential tropical cyclone number 10 that we thought was Irma, but really didn't turn out to be Irma. How's things down there in the low country this weekend?
Well, today was nice. Some clouds, a little bit of sprinkles. Only got up to about 80, 81. It was really just very nice. Everyone was like, can you keep the fall around? It's like, no, tomorrow's going to be 88. Warm front's going to lift north along with that Harvey circulation, and we're going to get a little of that. We might be dealing with a couple strong storms of our own come Friday, but we'll see. That looks like a lot of that's going to stay to our north. Saturday looks gross, just lots of moisture, lots of rain, and then starts to clear out Sunday and Monday. So we're going to salvage a nice little Labor Day weekend, not Memorial Day. A lot of rain though. It's all the same, right? But a lot of rain from PTC 10 though. I've got the cooker rods up from a couple days ago, and some almost some 6-inch totals here in Mount Pleasant, where we had a nice little band of rain set up and stay. So. Yeah, definitely a good soaker for us. We don't need it. I really am not looking forward to any rain, but yeah, so it goes.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, we had some nice cool temperatures. It was nice for several days. Even yesterday, we thought the clouds might break up and sun come out, but that northeast wedge was fairly persistent, especially around the backside of PTC 10. And we had sort of that mid-level northerly flow still coming down, more of a cat event, actually. So it kept things on the cooler side. Clouds are very slow to break up. We're keeping some mid-level strata around today, but I think we're going to get a decent little sea breeze or modest sea breeze tomorrow, probably building up into southern North Carolina, and then moderate on Friday. So it'll look more like a typical summer day on Friday, but then comes Saturday. Well, the thunderstorms Friday, don't forget those, but then Saturday gets a little bit messy as well. Tropics-wise, I know we're going to get to some of that in the show. We always kind of give a brief little heading on it. Let's see, do a screen share real quick. Looking at, let me know when you can see this.
You're there.
All right, so Tropical Depression Harvey is heading slowly off to the north-northeast at 8 miles per hour. It's got a lot of moisture with it. Over here, Irma, this has kind of been the big story today. We want to try to make sure that folks know that this system is very, very far out. We don't know for sure exactly which track it's going to take. We do know that it's getting to be a strong tropical storm at this time at 60 miles per hour. And the pressure is only 1,001 millibars, so it's not really, I don't think it's really going to strengthen too much over the next 12 hours or so. It may become a hurricane by Friday, but it still has a long ways to go. It has a little bit of dry air to combat, and the track of it does take it, continue it to the west, and then we see sort of a west-southwest drop. So the inclination here is that this thing could push a little further east towards the Dominican Republic, maybe just north of those islands, but beyond that, don't really want to say anything. Nothing to be concerned about at this very moment. If we look at Sims tropical track, the NHC does think it could become a Category 2 hurricane within the 48-hour forecast, 48 to 72 hours. So we're watching this one very closely. But again, like I said, nothing really to worry about at this moment as we continue to watch it. It spins off to the west. And back to you, Scotty.
All right, thank you, Shay. Peter, it seems like it's been fairly quiet up there in your area. What's been going on in the Philadelphia area?
Yeah, well, we had some downpours yesterday from that stupid tropical cyclone 10, whatever the name is, like that long name, it's ridiculous. But yeah, we did get pretty much a washout yesterday. It was just downpours all day long, and we only hit a high of 65 yesterday, which is pretty rare for August around here. But pretty much this whole month has been only 70s and 80s for highs, when usually we're in the low 90s, mid 90s, and high humidity. So even as we get into September, still looking pretty cool. Only 70s and 80s for highs. The Labor Day weekend, not looking too bad. We're going to get some remnants from Harvey on Saturday, but just looks like some scattered downpours, nothing too major from that. And then next week's looking pretty dry and cool too. So it's been pretty quiet around here this summer. Nothing too major going on. And hopefully we don't get any hurricane threats the next month or so. But who knows with Irma spinning out there in the Atlantic. But all is quiet, all is good. So, Scotty, back to you.
All right, thank you, Peter. And James, I'll toss it to you finally here in the Charlotte area. It's been pretty quiet around here, not much to talk about.
No, I've had the windows open at night, saving on that air conditioned bill a little bit. For folks who are watching on our broadcast that is on Facebook and Periscope this evening, I'm going to put Peter back in the double box for a second. Peter, are you copying me? I see that green sheet behind you. I see it.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to copy a little bit.
Okay. All right. You got to spread it out a little, though. No,
yeah, it's a little wrinkly.
The microphone first. So, but other than that, Scotty, the weather here has been great, and I'm hoping it stays nice and cool. Hope the electricity bill out a little bit, and keep the windows open, get some fresh air. So,
all right, sounds good, Ricky. We'll go ahead and toss it to you so we can talk about our precipitation probabilities, and then go into talking about Harvey some.
All righty, talking about the dreaded pops tonight, the thing that everyone sees every day, but probably is 100% confused about most of the time. Brad, you're perhaps no one better to talk about this because you see this on a daily basis, and as someone who's very involved in social media, you see different values all across the social media sphere. Talk a little bit about just the struggles on the basic scale of how there's so many different definitions.
Well, yeah, it's a difficult thing for the public to understand, because I think the way that meteorologists look at POPs, probability of precipitation, is far different than how the public looks at it. I know a lot of broadcast meteorologists who don't want to show POPs at all. And I think that's kind of the wrong approach, even though I do understand that generally the public does not understand fully what they mean. But I do think that the public has kind of adapted their own meaning to them. So I'm a big fan of showing them, just because the way that we present weather information on TV with a 7-day and icons and wording sometimes isn't descriptive enough. And it's kind of nice to have the extra text of a number to kind of emphasize what the probability of seeing rain is. Now, I'll be the first to admit the public probably doesn't understand, at least as a meteorologist, that that's the confidence in the chance of rain times the coverage. But I kind of think the public uses them similarly to just the scale from 0 to 10 in 10% increments of what is the chance I'm going to see rain. So I tend to think that people kind of use it that way, but you still run into the typical mentality, which I'm going to try to share this right here. This was a graphic that I actually stole from my good friend Evan up in at VEC, that when you forecast a 20% chance of rain, you'll get two people that are in the 20% chance say that we're never right. Why is it raining? Then the other 80% say, why isn't it raining? They said there was a chance of rain today. So you get a big confusion among the public on how they perceive these rain threats, especially with the advent of apps that people are using now and getting these numbers on their phone. I run into it often. One of my biggest battles is people going to the beach and pulling up their app for the beach, and it says 80% chance of rain. When in reality, that's just the typical afternoon little thunderstorm rolling through on the beach at about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you're done and it's clear. And people will literally cancel their plans at the beach because of that 80% pops, and they're not realizing that could be a rain shower for, 5 minutes and be done. So that is the constant battle to educate people on how we use them on the air and how they are interpreted on apps. So it's a daily battle, but I don't think they're going away. One of the reasons I do show them on the air is because they are available in other places. If I don't show them, they're going to get them somewhere else. So why not be from me? And hopefully I use them in a way that people kind of grasp. I honestly do use them on air similar to the way people interpret them, even though it's not to the letter of the National Weather Service definition. So I tend to adjust them based on how the viewer interprets that pops.
Troy, is there a certain way that you found that people kind of perceive them?
I have to agree completely with Brad and what he says. It's a number that the public uses, Ricky, that they have no idea what it is, but I'm okay with that. If you go talk to a class, and I spend my time, at least beginning tomorrow for the fall semester, in front of about 300 or 400 undergraduates in a non-major meteorology or intro atmospheric science class. And I asked them whether or not they'll take an umbrella with them with a 10% chance of rain, 20, 30, 40, the hands start. I don't care that much that's what people do. I think that's the same thing Brad's saying in a way. This is what they're doing. What's the downside to it? Hell, you get wet. I mean, that's the whole thing. You get wet. It's not like you're probably not going to die because of getting wet. And so as a result, this is what this is where we are right now with that. And we'll talk about what it means and that sort of thing later on. Where I get worried, Brad and Ricky and everybody else, is where we're taking it now. And you saw that in the early and mid 1980s. Brad wasn't born then. Anyway, yeah, I knew that, Brad. But when they started using hurricane probabilities, folks, the public began to equate that with rainfall. The outcome in the hurricane probabilities, you may get killed. It's not that you're going to get wet. And so we saw the danger involved in that. And now, as Brad and I can tell you, I finished up a week at the warning test bed in Norman at the University of Oklahoma within the last 3 months, talking about probability of tornadoes, lightning, this worn on facets sort of thing that the government's beginning to work on maybe for about 3 or 4 years from now. And that's the first thing I thought about. I'm sitting there going, oh boy, rainfall probabilities and, a 50% of a tornado occurring in this area. I'm worried that they take that 50% from the rainfall probabilities and try to equate it with a 50% chance of a tornado. We have a lot, Brad said it, we have a lot of education to do.
Yeah, Troy, I'm with you on that. That is probably my biggest concern as well, because we use these percentages and so many other hazards that, and for instance, we were talking before we went on live about SPC outlooks. We all know if we saw a 5% tornado risk tomorrow, we'd probably be a little concerned. But for the public, if they equate that to a rain chance, they're probably like, oh, no big deal. 5% doesn't sound like much. But to us as meteorologists, we understand 2% is kind of the threshold. We start looking at it, but 5, 10%, that's really high for a tornado chance because of the danger that a tornado does present.
And that's what we saw, Brad, with the hurricane situation when the probabilities came out in coastal areas. People were staying because they were looking at 5 and 10, 20% chances. And what we know about those hurricane probabilities is they'll stay relatively low until the storm gets there, and then they skyrocket. And by that time, you don't have time to evacuate. So, that's in a way, that's the only danger with the rainfall probabilities. I'm afraid people are going to take that forward in some of the new scientific applications and ways that we're actually headed.
As we go towards facets and everything, like you're kind of leading to, Troy, the probability of a tornado in that facets polygon may be 30, 40% of you being impacted. But let's say it's a rather large tornado or a tornado that turns suddenly or something like we've seen some do in the past. That 40% is still not zero. Yeah,
and that's what, Ricky, when I was in Norman, I was sitting there in that chair. All the folks up there, I was sitting there sweating. I was sweating those 20, 30% probabilities of tornadoes and things like that, and boxes that we were seeing and things that the computers were telling us. And I really kind of realized that because these are two different beasts in a way.
In a way, though, is it different? And Brad, you can comment on this too. Instead now it's almost like we're giving a 0 to 100% chance with the polygon boxes. Is it different how we would do it in the future where you would have a smaller number, but is it better in a communication aspect to do it that way?
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, because now we kind of say if you're inside the box, you're in danger. If you're outside, you're not in danger.
Yeah, and the thing, and I'm with Troy. I've gone through the hazardous weather test bed, but by the way, is one of the most amazing things you can participate in because it really is an eye opener. The thing I took away from facets and what I've seen and worked with facets is, I think one of the interesting things about those numbers is how even within the polygon and over time, kind of like with the hurricane probabilities, your chances could go up and down as the storm approaches. And I think that's one thing we haven't really educated the public on. They might just take the one instantaneous number and say, oh, that's my only risk, where over time that number could be increasing. It could go from 10% up to 50% and up to 70%. One of the products I looked at when I was at the Hazardous Weather Test Bed was the Severe Probs product for hail, tornadoes. And one of the things I found by working with that product, it gives you a percentage. It gives you a percentage of hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes. But what I found is the actual raw number wasn't really important. It was the jumps in the numbers that were much more useful. So it was almost like if you went from a 0 to a 5% chance or a 10% chance, that was more concerning to me than the fact that it was 5 or 10% because the number was going up. And so I think in some of these impact events like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, I think we might have to educate the public not to look at the actual number, but that the fact that the threat is increasing from where it was earlier. And, a good example I like to use, I like the medical field, but for whatever reason, people, even though the medical field has some of the same flaws we have in meteorology, for whatever reason, in meteorology, people don't take the threat seriously. In medicine, if I told you had a 5% chance of cancer, you probably go get something checked out, right? But for whatever reason in meteorology, if we tell you have a 5% chance of a tornado, people are like, no big deal. I'm not going to worry about it. It's kind of interesting how human nature, we treat the two threats in the same number completely different because one's meteorology versus medicine.
And really, Brad, the rainfall numbers, so those people out there that may be watching or listening to us tonight, the rainfall numbers, they're not that difficult to understand. It's the junk science that's out there that, with a 10% chance of rain, people think it means that 10% of the area is going to get rain or it's going to be raining 10% of the time, which is not what it means. All it is a pure statistical probability for a point. And what's even more interesting that I tell my students, it depends on the area being forecast for. I work for a radio station here in Austin. I've only got 6 counties. We're a low power station. And so my forecast kind of built on the Austin metro. Well, then, Brad, you've got a lot bigger area than that in your TV coverage area. You would have a different probability that you would include and that you would formulate. Weather Service is generally county based, I think, with most of that. So everyone's numbers may look the same, but keep in mind that we're probably forecasting differently for different locations.
Yeah, we were just talking about this today, Troy, that I was telling somebody when I do my forecast on air, what I'm talking about is a forecast for 22 counties. If someone asks me what's the specific forecast for Charlotte Motor Speedway, my information is going to be far different for that specific point than it was for the 22 county forecast I just gave on the air.
Right. And and it gets down to it where Brad and Ricky, that probability is a point probability that if the world were perfect, which it ain't, but if the world were perfect, that in the situation atmospherically was essentially the same, that you'd get rain, 20%, 2 of the 10 times. Essentially, it's a statistical probability. It's a point probability, essentially, if you're in that area that's being forecast for.
Yeah, and Brad brought up a great point earlier about beaches, and it depends on where you are. A lot of times, what your atmosphere is like. We see it many times where the Weather Service will call for a 40% chance of rain for the Charleston area, and that's the point there is from the airport, which is inland. It's about 20 miles inland from the actual Barrier Island beaches. So a lot of times with the sea breeze, when that builds up, you get that rain, and that'll fulfill that 40%. In fact, it'll double that. But at the coastline, when you get a dry line at the coast, there'll be nothing. And maybe the thunderstorms will approach the coast later in the afternoon and fizzle out before they even get there. So sometimes, with the beaches, I tell folks, go ahead, because people get worried when the percentage of rain goes up and they start asking questions. They have weddings and all of these things. I say, go ahead and keep your plans, but have a plan B. A lot of times these things don't end up hitting you or covering your area. And just like Troy said, it is a point forecast for a lot of spots.
Brad, I'd like to go back to the point that you made a little bit ago about the difference between the technical definition and what the public's understanding of that is, and how you had kind of maybe adjust, your delivery based on that. So one of the things that I think people have found also, or when I've kind of surveyed informally, is that sometimes the percent of time that it's going to be raining, so you got your forecast period of an entire day, and for sure you're going to get rain in the morning, and for sure it's going to be dry in the afternoon. I mean, that's 100% chance of rain because you are going to get rain during that 12-hour period. Do you then personally adjust that maybe it's a 70 or 80% based on the fact that the whole period you're covering is not going to be raining the whole time. And how does that work with, when you're forecasting smaller time periods? We have models that do 1 hourly time periods, and so the pops in those are far different from a whole day.
Yeah, and that can be confusing. Like, for instance, TV's all about hour by hour forecast. They'd love to do minute by minute forecast. And the pops for the minute by minute and hour by hour, you could have, like you said, like in the morning, those pops could be 80%. But my average for the day on my 7-day might only be like 40 or 50% because of what you said, that I only anticipate it raining for a little bit in the first half of the day and then it being done. So even in two graphics, I might have something that's slightly different. But I do agree with you that I think it's in that instance, if I put 100% chance of rain, even though I know it's going to be for an hour in the morning, most people have this word that I've grown to cringe, the washout. Is it going to be a washout? And to me, this is a term where I think of a washout like it's literally raining every hour the entire day. Right. And that rarely happens ever, except for, hurricanes and tropical systems like we've seen where it rains.
Here tomorrow.
Yeah. But, that's pretty rare. In the summertime, it never rains for 8-9 consecutive hours, right?
Right.
But if I put 100% chance in the forecast, because I know there's going to be a wave of storms in the morning that will be gone, technically that should be 100% chance of rain. The public looks at that as a washout for tomorrow, and they think the whole day is done. And if the sun came out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd look at me and go, I thought today was going to be a washout. And you say, no, my 100% was for the morning. So that's where you really get the confusing part of this, this whole thing about, the number, because people are using it as, how much rain are we going to see the entire day? Troy made a good point that the percent chance of rain is the chance you'll see any rain at all. It doesn't include intensity or duration. So people think that, like, you ever heard the joke, I forecasted 20% and someone gets in one of those little pulse type thunderstorms in the afternoon, they get like 3 inches of rain and they'll look at me and go, so much for your 20% chance, but the thing is, the 20% wasn't for the amount of rain. It was just that it was going to rain. That means it could have been drizzle for 5 minutes or a deluge for 30 minutes, And
that's why I tell people sometimes when they tell me that, Brad, they say so much for your 20%. And I'll say, well, yeah, it should have been more like 10%. You were the only person who got the shower. I always like to do that just to bug people.
No, that's true, because everybody just only cares about what happened to them.
It's I don't know. It's that point probability thing. And I think we've gotten real good, Brad, and all of you at distinguishing between periods with the HRR, whatever, how many R's, the short-term models that we have and everything else do a really remarkable job in helping us in some of that short-term stuff. And even the Weather Service, I think, does a pretty good job on their pages distinguishing even within the period tonight. I think the Weather Service has got some confusing wording in some of their forecast. But at the same time, I think we're all getting a little better with distinguishing that 100% this morning to maybe a decreasing chance or a 60% chance this afternoon.
Yeah, it's just a battle, and they continually talk about these smaller, and I think that's where you run into the issues, Troy, is when you're in that 20-30% range, and somebody does get rain. That's probably the most frustrating thing for a lot of people when they get caught in that shower. And they sit there and go, I thought the chance of rain was only 20 or 30%. And they don't realize that, well, somebody had to get rain. If there was a 20 and 30%, you were the lucky one. Go buy a lottery ticket,
Right.
That's kind of the way it is, and people, unfortunately, it's like what we see with tornado warnings. People only care to hear about tornado warnings if it affects them. And in rain forecast, it really, for them, if it rains on them, it should have been 100%.
I think it was Ricky that brought up, and here I'll go on this. So watch while I climb up on my soapbox. Brought up the deal with apps. I'm choosing my words carefully. Folks, be careful with your apps. You wonder why you can get a forecast for a zip code. It's because it's basically numerical weather prediction output without much in the way of human input. Forecaster input in a lot of cases. And I caution people about using apps and relying upon those sometimes because I guess if the model's good, it's okay, but if the model sucks, it's bad. And computer age is great, but I tell people to be careful with their apps.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm not going to be, I could preach about apps all day, but they're not going away. And I understand that there's a whole generation of people that's the only way they're going to get a weather forecast. I think the educational part of what Troy mentioned is it's okay to use app, but you got to understand where that information is coming from. If you understand that it's an automated single point, maybe single model driven forecast, then it's okay. At least you know the drawbacks. But I think a lot of people think it's the same thing that I'm saying on the air or a seasoned meteorologist is saying.
Well, but Brad, listen to me here. And again, here we go. What do people read stuff on the internet every day, Brad, that they think's true? 60% of the stuff on this machine right here is crap. It's not true. You can't believe 60% of what you see on the internet. And so I say, if we don't understand that what's up there is not true, then I don't think I worry about the fact of whether the general public can understand whether an app has good information.
So Troy, you're telling me that we're not going to have 15 days of darkness?
I'll move on. Thank you very much, Scotty.
Scotty, I just knew. How did I know you were going to bring that up?
No. I tell you what, Ricky, let's just cut Scotty off, okay? I'm sorry. Scotty's running the show.
Tonight, Scotty. And, I also put sunscreen in my eyes to protect myself from the eclipse.
Yeah, I heard that one last week.
All right. Well, we are coming up on 8:35. So is there any final points you guys like to make on this? Then we'll kind of transition a little bit for the last 20 minutes or so to Harvey and Brad. Will talk about some of the potential impacts of the remnants here in North Carolina as well.
I think everyone that's out there right now listening to us and seeing us completely understands probability of precipitation now. Okay.
I think the challenge perhaps, Troy, is then who understands it has to perhaps be the educator of people who don't. And we should use that as our opportunity sometimes.
So you're saying, Ricky, that we should become better critical thinkers in this country?
Well, that's
okay. That'll be the next podcast. That'll be the next one. We'll talk about it.
All righty. Well, let's transition over to Harvey and some of the impacts. I want to just go around the table here, guys. And obviously, this was a storm that impacted so many people. It is one that we have not seen in such a long time in the United States. Tell me just some quick, maybe a 30-second thoughts on what this storm is going to be known for in your head. And Brad, we'll go to you first, then we'll kind of jump to Shay and then go around the panel here.
I think it'll go down as, and it sounds weird to say this, but even though it was mainly rain, which I don't want to diminish it, it's going to go down as the worst hurricane in U.S. history, at least in the people's minds today, because of the widespread flooding that it caused. Now, Galveston hurricane, Andrew, there's other hurricanes you could argue climatologically and death toll wise are going to, be stronger, but in people's minds, because of the just epic amount of rainfall, and especially over one of the biggest cities in the U.S., I think Houston's the 4th biggest city in the United States, it's going to go down as one of the worst hurricanes ever. And I know dollar damage wise, it certainly will because of the amount of infrastructure. And if you've ever been in a flood, flooding is just, to me, of all the damage you can have, flood water is like the worst. It's just horrendous. And I will remember it for the rainfall rates. Well, I was in Katrina. I've been in Rita, Wilma. I could name a million storms. Matthew here. I've never seen rainfall rates like we've seen with this storm. 6 inches per hour. I think at one point there was minute by minute data I saw 10 inches per hour rainfall rates at one point. And then precipitable waters over 3 inches. That's just something I have never seen in my meteorological career. And that's what will stick out to me. And also that amazing GO-16 satellite imagery at landfall. I said it on Twitter, and I firmly believe it. I know there were stronger hurricanes, but on satellite representation alone, that was one of the most awesome and stunning and devastating looking things I've seen at landfall in the U.S., at least on satellite. And a lot of that had to do with the technology of GO-16.
Shay, you went through the Joaquin flooding a couple of years ago in South Carolina, and this, while obviously there was perhaps many more people impacted, this reminds me so much of that and the sheer magnitude of the flooding across a large area?
Yeah, so a little bit of a different setup there because you had a lot of mid to upper flow really just turning on the fire hose over the coastline. That propagated the propagation of surface moisture. It was just unreal here. To me, I would say Harvey is yet another reminder of just how deadly flooding can be for these hurricanes. It's not the wind that's the killer in most cases, it's the actual flooding. Seeing that thing in such a short amount of time blow up to major status, a category 4, within a 2 to 3 day period, super impressive. Like Brad said, the GOES 16 imagery showed it all. Rapid intensification in that area, even with the lower THCP, it really wasn't as high as say like what Matthew did in the Central Caribbean last year. We're constantly studying the causes for rapid intensification, and for that area, I wouldn't have expected it to become a category 4, maybe a 2 or 3. But there again, the flooding, that is the killer, and we saw that with Joaquin all the way through Columbia with the dams breaking. We saw that with Hurricane Matthew in Southeast North Carolina and Eastern North Carolina. That has got to be the highest priority. So another issue, I know I'm going over the 30-second limit here, but I'm going to go ahead and tap into this. But evacuations, I think it's important. Every state emergency management, DOT, they all have a specific plan for fast track evacuation from the coastline. There's got to be infrastructure for it, and it's just so important to get people out of the way of flooding, especially if you know that those areas are flood zones. I'm going to hand it back to you because I don't want to take up too much of the court here. So, Ricky, if you want to go to the next in the round, that's my thoughts.
Okay, Troy. I mean, you're from, or live in Texas now? Both?
Yeah, I'm in Austin, not that far from Ricky, where it made landfall. A couple of things that I would have you remember, and Brad and all of you've talked about the flooding. I will tell you that we have University of Texas assets down at Port Aransas and Rockport, where Harvey made landfall. Folks, it was a pretty destructive wind event as well. My whole concern would be that we lost focus with that once it got inland and we started getting 50, 60 inches of rain in some areas. But the damage in Port Aransas and Rockport, which is one of my favorite places to go, our family goes down there the last few years as a group, and I don't think we'll be able to go for the next couple of years now based on what we're able to see. I will tell you something that's interesting to me. Last Thursday, and Brad will back me on this, that I had some calls from newspapers and we were talking about this. And as that storm became stronger, I really thought about it long and hard, knowing my reputation might be at stake. But I said on Thursday evening to one of the local newspapers, I said, I believe this will be a catastrophe for the state of Texas. And on Friday, as it intensified, like Ricky talked about, I even went out further and I said, I believe this will change the shape of the Texas coast, essentially, and what we see. And I was very worried about that. And what I've seen is that's truly the case now. I think, Ricky, one thing that we've got to do a better job with is let people know that our colleagues at the National Hurricane Center in Miami, the meteorologists down there, their best skill really is with the track. We don't quite have the skill in what Ricky was talking about in strength. That's the one thing that it's been kind of tough for us to get. We're not quite as good at that as we are with the track itself. And I'll tell you, on the Corpus Christi WSR 88D at 10 o'clock on Friday night, y'all talked about the GOES 16 imagery, but I'll tell you, that image at 10 o'clock Friday night when that system made landfall off the Corpus Christi radar was truly a textbook version of a hurricane that'll be used in textbooks a long time into the future, I think.
Just watching the eye roll replacement cycle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was amazing. Yeah.
James or Jared or Steven, or not Steven.
Are you adding guests now, Ricky?
I'm mixing all my letters together.
Who's Steven?
Oh. We're adding new people to the panel. Any other comments you guys know in general here?
Well, talking about the 88D, this is the first major hurricane strike in the super res era. The last major hurricane strike, you had, you had 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, 256 bins on level 2 if you're lucky, and now we have like real-time access to next red level 2, and that made those mesovortices so clear. that is the thing that I'm going to take away from Harvey so much, is that you have this big eye, and then you have these mesovortices absolutely just crushing Rockport, and then it goes calm again, and it's just it's just crazy to watch. It was just crazy to watch. I had it up on. I run AWIPS at home, and I had Ghost 16 up. I think everybody is going to remember Ghost 16's first big landfall, and it's that imagery is burned into my memory.
Yeah, Jared, I agree that the Port Aransas Pass sensor went down due to one of those just on the outer eye wall as it was coming ashore. That sensor went down, the vane and anemometer went down, the pressure gauge, the barometer stayed intact. We had a deployable unit with one of our weather flow sensors with the University of Florida that stayed on track at the 10-meter level, never went out. And I didn't think that we were going to have a calm eye at first because of those mesovortices, but once it was on land for a bit, those sort of collapsed, and then we saw the calmness. So we saw the dip in the graph, the whole side profile. And it was really fascinating. But yeah, for a little while there, when those winds were only calming to about 20 to 30 knots in lulls, I thought maybe we're not going to have such a calm eye. But once they get over land, they tend to fall apart pretty quickly. But they are a real threat for hurricane hunters. They also cause tornadic activity, and some of those mesovortices can actually have higher winds than the actual eye wall. So I think we saw some gusts about 130 just inside the eye wall there.
And we actually, guys, I just noticed, I'm looking here at another screen. I didn't realize this, but we've actually got the Rockport, I don't remember if that's an AWOS or ASOS, but we've actually got that reporting data now again. It just started. I hadn't seen it all day. So
wow.
I saw the WPC numbers earlier, and it came in a max of 132, I think, was what the highest.
Really? Yeah.
A couple of things, and I'm kind of go off course from the flooding and stuff. It seemed like, I know every tropical system has tornadoes with it, but it seemed like there's just crazy amount of tornado warnings that was issued with this hurricane. And at one point, I think it was Sunday morning, I was sitting in church and not paying attention, but I seen flash flood warnings and then a tornado warning. So you have, people's homes who are flooded, and they're on the top story, and now you have a tornado warning over the same place. I was just thinking to myself, as a meteorologist, how do I communicate? What threat do you communicate there? Another thing, is some of the images. I know Jeff Piotrowski was out live streaming during the eye wall as it came ashore. That was some crazy footage. But one thing that I saw, especially with what's been going on in our country the past couple of weeks and months, is just seeing how everybody come together in Houston. And you've seen boat after boat after boat going out and rescuing people, no matter color, race, age, anything like that. Yeah. And that was really cool to see. And that will stick in my mind as well, just see how everybody came together and is still coming together today, to help out their neighbors.
I'll tell you something else. Yeah. That one thing that I'll always remember, and this guy happens to be a close friend of mine. I don't know how many of you saw the news conference yesterday with Chief Art Acevedo of the Houston Police Department. Art was here in Austin before he went to Houston and is a close friend, and he lost one of his sergeants in the floodwaters. We found out yesterday, and that probably, I know the chief pretty well to know that he was really destroyed by that. And that press conference yesterday, some I'll take away for a long time.
Talk about storm surge for a minute, guys. Did you guys see any huge numbers for storm surge? I know the predictions were out there of 9 to 12 feet. We had the storm surge warnings. I didn't see any huge storm surge flooding anywhere. I know in Rockport, some of the engineers that were there said that most of the damage seemed to be caused by wind and not surge.
Yeah. That's what I've heard, Ricky. We had a few people at the Marine Science Institute, which the University of Texas has down there, and I'm hearing a lot of stuff on wind. And even looking at some of the pictures, yeah, there's some seaweed in certain places, but most of the stuff that I'm seeing is not so much, didn't look so much surge related as it looked just like wind damage related.
Yeah, I think the surge, what I found working in the Gulf Coast for many years and looking at hurricanes down there, the big surge events down there tend to occur when the storm is strong out in the Gulf and it has time to build the surge up. I think because it intensified so rapidly near the coast, there wasn't enough water and fetch to get the surge big enough. I mean, some of the biggest surge events I saw in New Orleans were tropical systems like Lily and Isidore that were out in the middle. They were big, broad systems that sat there for a couple days. They actually weakened as they came near the coast, but boy, did they bring surge with them because the water had built up for days. And so I think that's, Katrina, that's why the surge was so high in Katrina, because it built that surge out in the middle of the Gulf when it was a Cat 5. And even though it weakened at landfall, that wall of water gets built up over the central Gulf. That's where you have the biggest surge events. With Harvey, it strengthened so quickly and so close to the coast. I don't think it had time to build up a big surge.
Yeah, I totally agree, Brad. Another thing is that there's a couple of stations down in that area. So if you're looking at the screen here, the Port Aransas sensor, the water level sensor, and Padre Island are both down. The Freeport one is operable, so is Galveston. And I didn't see too much of a surge. In fact, looking at the archives, I believe their water level is somewhere between about 1 and 2 feet. And the most that I got was about 4.52 feet. And that was at Bob Hall Pier, just south of Corpus Christi.
Yeah.
If we look, a little further north, there's really not too much more than that. If I can find the water level there. Go back to Friday again, just a little over 4 feet. So about anywhere from 4.1 to 4.7 feet is what I saw. So it was a maybe 2 to 3 foot surge from the storm. And just like Brad said, I do believe that was basically because the storm came together so quickly, it didn't have time to send a long period fetch or even a short period high swell fetch into the coastline. So,
James, Eric, or Peter, I'm getting close to 9, so I want to give you an opportunity to jump in here if you'd like to as well. Eric, let's go to you. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to watch. I think for me, not only was it the first hurricane that we've gotten with the GOES 16, even though it's non-operational and preliminary, it was still great data. But it was really also the first. I know we've had Sandy and Matthew close, but it was really the first major impact to this degree anyway in the social media era. 12 years ago when we have that devastating 2005 season, we didn't have Twitter, barely had Facebook, and certainly didn't have all the phone technology and stuff. And so I think it was really interesting to kind of watch the flow of information, good and bad. There's certainly some of those fake photos that we're used to kind of seeing out there, but to just be able to see what people are experiencing. You had chasers all over the place. Jeff Petrowski was mentioned, but it really gave you a pretty decent idea in real time of what was going on down there. And I don't know if that played into some of the response as well. If more people are aware of what's going on, perhaps it contributes to either a faster or a broader response than you might have, say 12 years ago, the last time this happened. But I thought that was fascinating how it kind of played out on social media as well.
And Ricky, I would just add to that I think from a broadcast standpoint, from a journalism standpoint, if I step back and I look at this, it was a nice reminder of the service that broadcasters and forecasters and emergency operators are all supposed to be providing in times of disasters. We call it a nice timeout to a lot of the political commentary you see on TV, even if it was just for a moment, and it got back down to the roots of what this industry is supposed to be doing. And so while we, of course, hope that events like this never happen, in situations where they do, it's nice to see some professional journalism happening once again.
Yeah, to go off of Eric's point with social media, CNN was telling people to write on Twitter and Facebook if they lost a pet, if they lost a family member, something like that, so they could share it out to everybody, so more people could see it, and hopefully they find the people that are lost and maybe stuck in the rubble somewhere if there's any damage. But social media was a huge thing with this storm because, like Eric said, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter back during the last major hurricane. So I think everybody was really, really talking this up the last couple of weeks, and it's really helping people out with the devastation and stuff.
Well, I've got a question for everybody then as we wrap this baby up in just a few minutes. Did people act appropriately, do we think? Does the social media help people perceive the risk any better than what we had 20 or 30 years ago?
I would argue perhaps social media adds a level of confusion at times to it. There's so many news sources out there, but I also believe that it makes it so much easier to get information out and so much easier to get what you want. But
But do you also agree, Ricky, that some of that information is not true, right?
100% some of that information is not true. I think there's a very fine line to walk between being useful and being an issue. We kind of saw some of the Houston mayor's tweets about not believing things out there on Facebook that were posted forecasting astronomical, crazy levels of rain. And some of those forecasts were actually perhaps the right forecast.
Well, you know, we have to remember that part of risk perception for people, not everybody's like us. They don't understand exactly what the risk is. And a lot of times, even all of us, even in life, we perceive risk based on past experiences. And unfortunately, people are moving to coastal areas that have never had a chance to experience a hurricane. They wouldn't know what one is like. All they go is what they've heard. And as a result, and I think one of the best stories, and I won't bore you with my age, but one of the best stories, and Brad remembers this, is with Hurricane Camille in the late 60s on the Mississippi coast. They couldn't figure out how to get people out of the 6-block area south of the railroad berm north of US Highway 90, and it's Sunday morning, and we've got 18 hours till the storm comes ashore, and they couldn't get people to perceive the risk. And finally, one young Mississippi Highway Patrol trooper, they're sitting in a jail holding this meeting, trying to figure out how they're going to get people south of the railroad berm to leave. And one of the guys said, let's just take all the fingerprint pads and all the fingerprint things and take them out there and say, look, we've asked you to leave, and now that you've told us you're not going to, let's get a full set of your fingerprints, and I need the name and number of your next of kin. And what we learned there, they got much more of an evacuation rate at that point because people realized this thing may kill me. Yeah. And there's no state that I know of, and maybe Brad has some insight on. There's no state of Texas you can't force. There may be such thing as mandatory evacuation. A law enforcement officer cannot, at the point of a gun, force someone to leave their home. Period.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right, Troy. I think, I used to have the saying in New Orleans, and unfortunately, it bared out after Katrina, was that your level of preparedness is only as good as your memory of the last disaster. Right. So if like you said, it's been 12 years since a major hurricane. If you lived on the coast and never experienced it, you don't perceive the risk. And I think sometimes it's really difficult to tell people how bad it's going to be. I think you're right. You can't force people to leave. That's why I think some of the mayor's tweets were kind of erroneous, but I also agree with him that they couldn't evacuate. You can't force people to leave. I think the one thing he went wrong with was telling people that wanted to evacuate on their own not to do so. I mean, that's kind of dumb. If you want to leave. I mean, you should never not tell people not to leave.
I do know, just to let y'all know, that in the state of Texas in the last week that we had some of the emergency officials, law enforcement people going by and saying, if you're not going to leave, at least take this Sharpie. I want you to write your Social Security number on your arm, and we go from there. And I think they got people that said, what, maybe I will leave. So that works pretty well too.
Brad, I liked your quote that you tweeted out as Harvey was approaching. It says you evacuate because of what could happen. It's like wearing a seatbelt all those times. You did it just in case you needed it.
Yeah. And that's why that's why I said earlier about the medical analogies and stuff. I find it fascinating and disturbing as well, like how people perceive weather threats versus other threats in their life. Like I wear my seatbelt every single day in my car. I've never actually needed that seatbelt, but I still wear it. And I'll hear from people like, I evacuated 4 times for nothing. Why do I need to keep evacuating? Well, I go back to the seatbelt analogy. Because you live in the coastal sections, that's the price you pay for living there. You must evacuate. You will probably evacuate 5 times for no reason, and it'll be the 6th time that you actually have to leave. So I just think that's the thing I think we have to preach home, that yes, there are going to be false alarms and you may not do it, but just like other things in life, there's a risk involved. You're going to have to be overly cautious in these situations.
And one of the most interesting, Ricky and Brad and everybody else, one of the most interesting things that I use to tell my students about this is a course that we offered at one time. It's called The Geography of HIV and AIDS. And you go back to the early 1980s, when this was small, clustered, and identified by the folks from Atlanta in the San Francisco area, primarily the gay population. And then you talk to people in 1990 and 2000, and you see how people at first said, oh, good, that's in that part of the country and it doesn't involve me. to where we are now, where AIDS and HIV has become more manageable. And between that, we've gone through a death series where it was a death sentence, and how people perceive that risk. And it's the same thing, exactly the same thing Brad's talking about. It just depends on how you're affected by it. And, you know, at one point that was something on the West Coast, and all of a sudden across the United States is a concern for all of us nowadays.
I've got one last thing I want to bring up here, and then I will toss it back to Scotty. One of the things that always surprises me, and obviously every storm is different, but let's use this storm for example, how confined the wind damage was. And I think when we talk about catastrophic damage and these, you know, uninhabitable for weeks and months, we really have to be specific where we're talking about. It was really just that western eye wall towards Rockport, what was it again, Troy?
Port Aransas, yeah.
Port Aransas, where that damage was so incredible.
Yeah, and it was in a small area, and you've got to really, if you haven't, come down and visit beautiful Texas and go look at that area, because this is not an area where you have a lot of big buildup. It's mainly small towns, tourist towns, fishing towns, and things like this along the mid-Texas coast. One thing that was also big is that system south there got around Cuero, Texas, and did loop-de-loop about 5 times, and it continued to thrash the area with these tropical storm force winds. But it's not a real highly populated part of Texas where it was.
Gotcha. All right. Shay, I think you had a question, and then we'll give it to Scotty after your question.
Yeah, so looking at the total rainfall amounts, just to give folks an idea of the impacts from rain in some of these areas of Texas. I'm not sure what the final numbers are. I know the preliminary numbers were out. As of 9 a.m. CDT yesterday, there was 49.32 inches at Mary's Creek. That's near Houston. So that's over 4 feet of rain. We're talking 20 trillion gallons of water plus. It's just an immense amount, 4 feet of rain in such a small period of time. Does anyone have any of the latest updated numbers since Harvey has finally left the area?
I do, Shay. I actually was just writing down the numbers as of, I think, the top of the last hour. 51.88 inches of rain in Houston, which is obviously a new record. Does that jive kind of with what you were seeing?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I think there was one record, I'm not sure if it's true, something, a Hawaiian tropical storm that dropped 52 inches. Is that correct? And is that close? Pretty close to that.
I think it is that, but keep in mind, I kind of was cringing a little bit yesterday when the media was reporting this new record. Keep in mind, those records are going to have to be vetted by our friends at NCEI. This is going to be something that's going to take a while. They're going to look at those, the sighting of those rain gauges and a bunch of things like this. So the media, I think, hopped the gun a little bit yesterday. We ought to say those are preliminary records until we can vet those numbers a little more.
Yeah, I think some of those gauges actually failed. They might be under-reading some of the numbers, to be honest with you.
Right. Yeah. 49.32 was through INSEP. It was. I'm not sure if it's completely vetted by them or not. But yeah, like you said, I mean, the State Climate Office, all these other authorities are going to be looking through that data. So we'll find out. But I do know that they had to make new colors on the rainfall maps just to accommodate the amount of rainfall. It's unbelievable.
And like the wind damage down near Corpus, don't forget Beaumont, Port Arthur, almost 48 inches of rain over there. They got clobbered.
Our state climatologist, Dr. John Nielsen Gammon from Texas A&M, I'm sure will be looking at that. And, you know, keep in mind, too, that some of these may have been tipping bucket gauges, which you always worry about with underestimating totals by up to 10 to 20%. In real heavy rain events. So they're going to be looking very closely at that. And
one thing I thought was kind of cool, if you want to use that word, was that the WPC added a high risk on day 3 to their outlooks now. They've never done that before, and Greg Carbon tweeted that they had to change that for this event. So certainly a storm that will go down in the record books, and one that will unfortunately change people's lives in Texas. And there'll be people that talk about before Harvey and after Harvey. All right, Scotty, we'll hand it off to you to kind of wrap up everything.
All right, thank you, Ricky. A few things, we had a few questions and comments. Joseph Allison says, hello to Troy. Great to see you on the show. There's a Kevin Wagner. He's wanting to know just a quick question for you guys. I think we all will say yes on this question, but pretty sure that Harvey's name will be retired from the hurricane list.
Yeah, I'd say that's 100%.
All right. And then, Brad, one last question for you. We had someone tweet in. They were wanting for you to briefly go over maybe what the severe potential may be here in the Carolinas for Friday.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on the severe potential because we've almost got kind of a weird kind of wedgie kind of setup here in the Carolinas, especially up towards the Charlotte area. We might have stratiform rain and clouds that would deter instability for any major severe weather threat. But if we get any sun breaking through at all Thursday or Friday, I think we're going to have to watch for some rotating storms because there is plenty of shear. I think it's the typical Carolina setup. Boatloads of shear and no cape, high shear, low cape event with a tropical system. But, these low top tropical type little storms, you got to be careful that you could get something to spin up really quickly. So right now, I think the SPC's right on it with the marginal risk for both Thursday and Friday. But I think the stratiform rain, which is actually some of it's moving in tonight. I'm looking at some light rain falling right now in Charlotte. Is probably going to keep the instability down and keep us from getting anything major. But again, like we do all the time, watch out for that sunshine. Pops out on Friday, then we might have some issues. Friday certainly looks like more of a risk than tomorrow.
All right. Well, I do want to thank both of you guys. We've had a big following on our YouTube page and our Facebook Live. A lot of comments and questions and our Twitter coming in. So I think everyone enjoyed the topic tonight. Before we do log off, Brad, I know you got to get back to the station, so I'm going to let you go ahead and promote your social media platforms to our followers. And I'm sure if they are not following you, they'll want to after the show.
Yeah, just check me out. It doesn't matter what social media. Just look for WX Brad, and I'm pretty much on everything. You can find me my blog, my YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even Snapchat. But I don't do as much Snapchat as I like. I kind of given up on Snapchat a little bit, publicly at least. I don't mind Snapchatting with friends, but any of those sources you can find me.
You used to be able to find Brad on bumper stickers too. I don't know if he still has those.
Yeah, I saw some floating around in Louisiana and Texas one time. I heard.
Are you a Snapcaster?
No, I just the Snapchat thing. I thought had huge promise for weather because of the quick interaction, kind of like with Twitter. But I'm just finding that the user input from the public is just not there. I think it's just a peer-to-peer type thing seems to work better. So publicly, it just doesn't seem to have the impact that the other platforms have right now.
And Mr. Troy, do you have any social media or any way our followers or listeners may be able to contact you?
I don't even know what y'all are talking about. I have a Facebook page, and that's about it. And you can find it pretty easily. But it's been a lot of fun tonight. I thought we were going to have Scotty like 5 minutes and I could tell you secrets about Brad or whatever.
We got some time. So.
Oh, we do. Okay, that's all right. I'll negotiate with Brad over that.
That's a whole nother show.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate it. Stick on after the show, Troy. We want to say for coming on, but I will say, Peter, you kind of lined the next two shows up right quick. I'll let you go ahead and promote. We're going to be talking about going into September as we round out the show.
All right, so next 2 weeks or so, we're going to be talking about studying meteorology. We're going to have a few college kids on and some TV meteorologists talking about their school career, I guess, talking about what they took in college to study meteorology, where they went, and where they are going to work or maybe took an internship or whatever. So next week, we've got Trevor Gibbs, Kyle Kiel, and Sam Harris here to talk about their where they went to school and stuff. So it should be a good show.
Yeah, one nugget with that, Trevor Gibbs is at the College of Charleston, which just started their brand new meteorology program or their graduate program last year. So we're looking forward to hearing from him and seeing how that program's going along and where they are.
And Eric, I think we have one of your interns on the next week, correct?
Yep, week 2 is going to be Alex Herbst. He's a graduate student at Mississippi State, has his undergrad from up in the northeast part of the country, but is down here for his graduate and working towards the television side as well. So look forward to having him on.
All right. Well, I do want to
steer him away from that right away.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Maybe you should come back on, Brad, in a couple of weeks.
Don't do it.
I do want to tell you guys, we do have a little bit of a breaking news for our show. We're actually going to be pushing back our start time starting next week to 8:15 Eastern. Kind of give us a little better time getting prepared and making sure all the bugs are worked out before we start our show. So starting next week, we'll be going on the air at 8:15 Eastern time. We'll still try to keep it within our 45 minutes to an hour show. But again, 8:15, and Peter has created a graphic, so we'll share that on our platforms over the next several days so you guys can get accustomed to that. But again, we want to thank Troy and Brad for coming on tonight. Great show. And again, if you're listening on our podcast, make sure that you subscribe to them and like them and share it so we can get the word about what Carolina Weather Group's doing. So for everyone, we hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you back here next Wednesday night.